Everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Ayal Yogev, CEO and founder of Anjuna Security. Ayal has 20 years of experience in enterprise security market, serving most recently as VP of Product Management at SafeBreach. Anjuna, makes the public cloud secure for business. Software from Anjuna effortlessly enables enterprises to safely run even their most sensitive workloads in the public cloud. Y'all, thank you so much for joining the show. I know we were back and forth a little bit and scheduling and rescheduling, but I really appreciate having you on. Really excited to learn about your kind of expertise in the security field, as well as your successes building startups. And I know you were part of a successful IPO, so we'll dive into all that good stuff. But before we get into all that, what were you doing before you started Anjuna?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on, Julian. Pleasure to be here. So as you said, I've been in enterprise security for almost over 20 years now, almost 25 years. So happy to kind of go through my background, but just before Anjuna, I was the VP of product at a company called SafeBreach, which is another enterprise security company doing breach and attack simulation.
Wow.
Yeah, and essentially all my career was in enterprise security. I started in Unit 8200, which is the Israeli equivalent of the NSA. There's a lot of
Yeah.
security founders come
Yeah.
from that background. And after a few years there, moved to the private sector, and all my career was essentially in product management in enterprise security companies. And as you
Yeah.
mentioned, I was part of the IPO of Imperva. I was leading the umbrella product management team at OpenDNS, and we got acquired by Cisco. So I've been a part of an acquisition to Cisco, and I was part of an acquisition by IBM early in my career as well. So yeah, been a lot of super interesting security companies.
Yeah, no, describe the enterprise security process. What are the things that enterprise companies focus on? What are the testing that they do, the penetration? I'm assuming that they have teams that deploy and run kind of different attacks on their own code base then to make sure that it's secure. Were you a part of that system, or were you building software to essentially kind of protect the internal mechanisms that run in enterprises?
No, that's a great question. So I was always part of the vendor side essentially. After I moved to the private sector side, and I was part of always building security products that help increase the security of our customers. Um, so this is some of the start I was on, but obviously within companies, as you can imagine, within large banks, healthcare organizations, essentially every organization today, if you're in any way connected to essentially anything, you're going to have to think about security. So
Mm-hmm.
within every organization, there are, people or teams or,
Mm-hmm.
complete organizations tasked with the security. And these are the people that, you engage with when you're building security products.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what ways are companies compromised, or how they can be compromised. I had another founder on who was in the security space, and he was talking about teams for ransomware that would deploy and essentially get companies' data and then have a ransom for it, and they have to pay or not pay. What are some ways that companies can get compromised that you've seen in your experience?
Yeah. So yeah, ransomware is definitely a big area of concern.
Yeah.
Um, But I guess let me talk about sort of two breaches that happened in the last couple of years that I thought were particularly interesting. One that's essentially in the news now is around a lot is Uber, the Uber breach that happened. And what sort of happened there was actually interesting. It started with a phishing email. And basically, one of the employees there sort of got a phishing email. They, clicked the link, and what sort of happened is that the attackers used sort of phishing to bypass the two-factor authentication. So I know probably a lot of people now know, once you try to log into something, there's another factor. It's not just sort of people talk about kind of there's the what what you have, or who you are in terms of having more than one factor to authenticate. So it used to be just a password. But again, if somebody kind of gets access to your password, then it's very easy to log into your account. So the two-factor means it's not just a password, it's also something that you have, for example. So if you have your phone on you, you get a text message to the phone, and you can put that on. So it's a better. But the problem is if you get phished, if basically an attacker sort of reaches out to you and so send me, I'm from IT, please send me the password you just received via text, and you send it to them, then there's a way to bypass that second factor. That's what happened at Uber. And once that happened, the attackers were able to get root access to the system. And through that, one of the problems is once you have sort of root access to a system, once you have access to the infrastructure itself, you just have access to everything. There's really, there are very, very few ways to kind of stop that. And once that happened, essentially the attackers were able to get access to the information. Another super interesting one was the Capital One breach. And this was, the reason it was interesting, this was, Capital One is a huge AWS customer, as I think is very publicly known. And what happened there was that a former AWS employee leveraged their sort of knowledge and access to AWS to essentially go and steal data from Capital One. And that was just a super interesting use case because it sort of highlighted the challenge that customers have when they're moving to the cloud, which is when you're running in the cloud, it's somebody else's infrastructure, right? It's somebody else is managing the infrastructure for you. And suddenly you've kind of opened up the door to a lot of, different potential issues that you just wouldn't necessarily have if you're running in your own data center. And I'm not saying that the cloud is not more secure than on-prem. I think to a very large extent, the cloud is more secure than on-prem, but suddenly there's this completely new, you're just bringing a third party to go manage this. And if the clouds get hacked, if an employee of the cloud, wants to get access, if, the government wants to come into the cloud vendor with a subpoena, which is something that a lot of, especially European companies, are worried about under, regulations like GDPR, there's really nothing that you can do as a company to stop it. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why companies don't move more workload to the public cloud.
I hear a lot of this in a conversation around the internet computer, bringing kind of a decentralized approach to cloud infrastructure, kind of replacing AWS to have a completely decentralized, a kind of cloud system that you can host data, you can store data, and have different protocols on there. How do you kind of think about Web3 and its involvement in cloud? And have you thought about it yourself and transitioning into those products? And then I obviously want to get into Anjuna and kind of what you're doing with companies right now. But I'm just curious about your thoughts on Web3 that now that it's kind of moving or trying to move off of AWS into this internet computer and create kind of an internet decentralized with different nodes, kind of a cloud-based service. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a super interesting idea. And I actually, a lot of our, think we do have a lot of Web3, customers essentially. So I think that there's a lot of merit to these ideas. But in terms of security, moving to this sort of decentralized cloud is actually a much, much bigger security risk, right? Because if there's sort of one throat to choke, so to speak, right? You have AWS or Azure, Google Cloud, and you kind of know that they're in charge of the security. There's still a bunch of issues there, but at least, they're obviously doing everything they can to keep you safe. When you have, the sort of decentralized system where you just don't know where your code is gonna be, executed, that becomes an even bigger sort of security risk. So there's a lot of merit in terms of the sort of financial benefits of doing something like this. And there's a lot of excess compute out there that can be leveraged for this. But then security wise, I don't think a lot of, large enterprises are going to be using this until the security of that is going to be solved. And it's something that they're not even using the cloud as much as they should because of the security of the cloud. This is at a whole new level of sort of security issues that you introduce.
Yeah. What is Anjuna doing to kind of help, the public cloud be secure so that, companies don't have to worry about these different bad actors or attackers that are kind of working to get into their data? What are ways, and I'm sure, your experience in the military kind of helps with the different ways that people can attack certain data and different access points. But yeah, what is Anjuna doing that really being helpful or kind of creating the security around? Because the last thing companies want to have to deal with is a security attack, because not only does it cost money, it kind of halts all production and within their internal workings with their engineering team and everyone. But what is Anjuna doing to kind of help kind of secure the cloud?
Yeah. So as I sort of mentioned, the sort of the core, I'd say, security problem there was never a solution for is the fact that once somebody gets access to your infrastructure, they just have full access to everything you do on top of that infrastructure. And there's really nothing that you can do to stop them from just accessing everything. And if I go just one level deeper, it's essentially because when an application has to process data, it just has to decrypt the data loaded into memory. And at that point, the data is completely exposed. There's just nothing you can do to stop it or There was nothing you could do to stop it in the past. And a lot of how the security industry was built was essentially a bunch of these sort of band-aid solutions to try to solve that sort of core problem that was never solved, right? And that's why we have all these sort of perimeter security solutions to make sure that nobody can even get access to your infrastructure. And you have solutions around detection. What happens if somebody does get access? How can I detect that they have access and at least know that something bad happened? And that's why you have a lot of sort of these patching, make sure everything is patched, because if there's some sort of, you know, 0-day vulnerability on the operating system, somebody can use that to get, higher level of access. So a lot of it was sort of patches to the fact that if you have access, there's like game over, right? You just have access to everything. There's nothing you can do to stop it.
Yeah.
And what sort of happened in the last few years is that the CPU vendors, and you kind of needed the hardware vendors to go and solve this core problem, because any software solution can be bypassed if you have root access. But the CPU vendors have built hardware to finally solve that problem, to kind of build a solution that even if you have full access to the infrastructure, you have root access, physical access, whatever level of access you have, you're just not going to have any access to the data. And this was a change in the hardware level. And what we do is, this is very similar to what happened in virtualization, which was this extremely powerful technology to essentially run, anything virtualized. But nobody was really using it until VMware built a software stack to make it easy. And that's exactly what we do for this new concept called confidential computing. This is an extremely powerful change in how this is essentially a new hardware architecture to some extent. It's a very, very big shift in that architecture, but it's extremely difficult to use. And kind of like what VMware did to virtualization, we're doing to confidential computing. We built a software stack to make it super simple to use this with anything.
Incredible, incredible. And I think offering that level of security not only kind of helps production, I'm sure, go more quickly, but the team is building without having to really think too deeply into who might attack them or take their data. I'm curious because this is not your first successful company. You've been a part of a lot of great teams in the past. What's different between kind of teams as they grow and build versus the teams that you've seen? You had a successful IPO, you were at some larger companies as well. What are the mechanisms that make companies great? And what I mean by great is that run efficiently, run effectively, hit metrics, hit goals, but also go through the different ebbs and flows of what companies go through, which is lows in customer acquisition or product development, what have you. What kind of makes the difference in those companies that run well versus those that don't?
Yeah, to me, and again, I'm sure you're going to hear probably, if you talk to 10 people, you're going to hear 10 different, answers to this. And to me, what I think has always been the big differentiator is culture.
Mm,
And if you have the right sort of culture in the company, and you have the right sort of, people working together, wanting, believing in the mission, believing in what they do, they enjoy working together, they enjoy, spending time with one another. That's sort of what kind of makes companies really, really great. And that's how you kind of, every company is going to have, things are going to go, sideways in some cases, right? Like you're going to have, not everything is going to be up and to the right all the time. And
sure.
when you have the right culture, when people enjoy, working together, they really believe in what you do, that's where you can kind of survive this, kind of come out stronger, on the other side of it. Whereas companies that have, not great cultures, you start getting a lot of, turnover, a lot of people, basically saying, I'm not sure I want to be a part of this.
Hmm. What are some ways that you kind of maintain a strong culture?
Yeah, it's funny that to me, culture is, a lot of companies have these sort of 10, this is our culture, 10 things on the wall that like, I
Amen.
don't think that's what creates culture, right? Yeah, it's not about what you say, it's about what you do. To me, culture is the, thousands of little decisions that you make every day. And that's what really defines the culture of the company. And if you have these sort of, I just don't know how many companies, and some companies that, I've worked for, you had these sort of 10 things on the wall, but when you actually ask what the culture is, it has nothing to do with those sort of 10 things on the wall. So to me, it's essentially that it's those thousand decisions that you make, and everybody, the executives in the company, the managers, everybody kind of make, every day being, and then, the employees, essentially everybody makes, they're part of the company. And I think it all comes, this is a culture, is something that's very top down, right? People kind of
Yeah.
look at their managers to see what they do, and managers look at their, the executives, and the executives look at me to kind of see, how I make decisions. Um, and I can tell you kind of the way I think about culture is, and I kind of stole this from Eric Yuan, the CEO of Zoom, who I think thinks about this exactly the right way. And we kind of use the same thing, and we use one word, which is care. You know, caring about the employees, caring about sort of anybody around the company, right? The obviously the customers, prospects, they're in the interview process, people that leave the company. How do you treat people? They're that either they decided to leave or you decided to part ways with them. How do you treat them? Kind of treating them nicely and fairly. Like
Yeah.
that's just how you build culture. And there's I said 1,000 decisions you have to make every day, and I'm trying to think through all these decisions through that lens of
Mhm.
what's going to be sort of how to care about, so everybody make sure they're treated fairly and nicely.
Yeah, I love the focal point on kind of one idea or kind of I guess not the mission, but the value that drives a company and the decisions you make. The company that I run with my co-founder, we kind of think about transparency and communication as those, transparent communication. If we do anything right, that's what we do. And it really does kind of help simplify the decisions you make or the actions you take and kind of connect you with your customers at a level that's consistent, which I think is where a lot of companies may not have the insight to do. When you connect with clients and thinking about this customer acquisition process within the security realm, what is that like? Because I'm always curious, we run a service-based business, so it's pretty straightforward in regards to, how we affect their companies and culture. But I think a lot of what goes on with security companies is kind of under the hood, and you have to get to different stakeholders that know exactly or have the expertise to know what's going on to be able to adopt your technology. What's that process like? Kind of, if you wouldn't mind covering.
Oh, I lost you again.
Can you hear me
I
again?
can hear you now. Yep.
Yeah. Go through this process with your customers to kind of help them, adopt your technology.
Yeah, it's actually a super interesting question, and I'm sure you guys have been through this. Part of essentially the sort of product market fit journey that everybody talks about is exactly figuring that out. Is
Mm.
what is your distribution model? What is your essentially sort of go to market process that's going to be a good fit for your specific company, for your specific product? And this was sort of the journey that we were on sort of early on in the company's life, is kind of figuring that out. Are we a sort of top-down motion? Are we a bottoms-up motion? Who are we selling to? What type
Yeah.
of customers are going to be, like which verticals are we gonna, are going to be the early adopters of this? Which, who at these companies are going to care about this, right? So to me, this is the journey that every company has to go through. And to some extent, I think the distribution model, to some extent, is more important than the product. To some extent, like and again, I grew up in product, so I know the importance of product. But I think figuring out the distribution model is even more important for you to be successful if you want to build a large, successful company.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we've tried a lot of things. I can tell you, at a high level in security, very traditionally has been sort of a top-down type of a sales model, and it's sort of the traditional enterprise security with people sort of on the ground, wining and dining, customers, meeting with the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, with
Yeah.
their teams. And we're starting to see a bottoms-up motion starting to emerge a little bit in security. I don't think the transition has been sort of completed yet, but we're starting to see more companies that are starting to build the bottoms-up motion. And I think today a lot of it is not necessarily like the entire motion is bottoms up, but it's mostly used as almost like a lead generation tool, where if companies can figure out a way for, let's say a developer, somebody to kind of come on, download something, kind of use it, and then you can kind of come in with your top-down sales. That's a model that I think is starting to emerge more. And there's a lot of sort of conversation in the security space. Is this going to go to kind of full bottoms-up motion or not? But we've seen very, very few companies being able to really build a sort of a true bottoms-up motion.
Yeah.
For us, again, as I said, we tried a lot of things when we were an early company to kind of see what makes sense for us. And I think this is sort
Mm.
of a journey every entrepreneur sort of has to go through to figure out what makes sense. And you're going to have an idea what you think might make sense coming in, but you're going to end up maybe in a very, very different place where you thought you're going to end up. And for us, it's definitely a top down, like the traditional enterprise sales motion, top down. We've tried different things. There's a lot of benefits to a bottoms up motion, but it was just very, very clear for us that it's top down.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell us a little bit about the traction. Who are you working with? What are you excited about? What are the how have you effectively, if you have any percentages or numbers you want to boast about, this is the time. But how have you been able to kind of give companies the comfort and security that your product offers? Tell us a little bit about that traction.
Yeah, so it's funny, but we started seeing traction with essentially, I'd say a few, there's a few verticals where we see a lot of traction. One is sort of traditional financial services. So you can think of large banks, these types of organizations, and it's sort of like people don't think of these organizations as early adopters, but weirdly enough in security, they usually are early adopters just because these large organizations are usually, they're both targets because obviously they handle a lot of money that people want to get to, and also they're very, very regulated. So they sort of have to be at the cutting edge of anything security. So weirdly enough, they are early adopters for a lot of security stuff, or a lot of security products. And we've been definitely seeing a lot of traction with them. Then I think this goes beyond this goes into actual production environments there, and to get to production environments with these large financial services, that's not an easy task, and it's a relatively long sales cycle. But again, because of sort of the type of product that we've built, we've seen successes there. Another one is we see a lot of traction on the SaaS side of the house. So SaaS companies, which basically the value prop there is they want to tell their customers, we don't have access to your data within our environment. And this is something that we can help with. I mentioned Web3 companies, they're sort of a subset of that. They're sort of in the intersection of financial services to some extent and SaaS vendors. So we see obviously a lot of traction there. And the last one, we've seen traction with governments. And one that I can talk about because they're a public reference, I think it's probably one of the best examples is the Israel Ministry of Defense. And they're essentially using us to move to the commercial cloud, essentially for the first time. And this is an organization that you'd never think would ever be able to move to the commercial cloud, but with the level of security and privacy that we provide, they can move to the commercial cloud with the security and privacy of a gov cloud, which is super, super interesting. And what I really like about and why I like mentioning them is that this is probably one of the most sophisticated organizations on the planet, in terms of their security, and in terms of being able to validate security products. And the fact that they, and we've definitely, the validation process was extremely, like it was deeper than anything I've ever experienced, in my career. And the fact that they came to the other side saying, yeah, this is secure enough for us to go move to the public cloud this is, we're willing to publicly talk about this on top of this has just been phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that you're able to work with government. And I was talking to another guy who was directly working with government, and he was doing something in particular around different bids that that they go through and kind of contracts that governments offer. Because of the level of sophistication, the amount of decision makers that are in there, it's a long sales cycle, and it's a lot of relationship building, but it's also a lot of integration and figuring out ways that your product will work within that system. What are the biggest challenges that Engine faces today?
I'd say it's sort of the more, obviously the economic situation we're in is not helpful, I think, to sort of any company, right? And, we feel like everything is becoming a little softer, right? Like sales cycles it feels like they're getting a little longer than they used to. And the amounts that people are willing to spend seem like people are more sort of aggressive, asking for, larger discounts, right? Like we're seeing things sort of softening up in the market, but I think that's something that's probably shared across everything. Specifically with us, I think in general, and it's I think it's a bad thing and a good thing. What we do is essentially we're creating a new category. And by category creation, like we're sort of teaching the market there's sort of a new, better way of doing things. It's not like another, a next gen, whatever, right? The next gen firewall, next gen antivirus. Like this is a really sort of new way of doing things. The good thing about that is that this is how you build like extremely large companies, right? Salesforce was a category, like they created the category of SaaS, right? This is a category creation, and obviously they've been extremely successful. VMware was a category creation. They sort of educated the market. There's a new way of running workloads. So every time, actually, I have this example that I love using. It's from a book called Play Bigger, which is a phenomenal book talking about category creation. And they say that the category creator usually takes 90% of the economic value of the market. And they use an amazing example with the iPhone. And obviously Apple created, the smartphone category. And there were things before then, but they're the ones that really created in a major way and kind of educated the market.
Mhm.
And they're not the biggest, like they own what, 10% maybe of the global smartphone market. But they have about 90% of the economic value of that market because
Yeah.
Android is free, and these, the Samsung and these hardware vendors essentially have very thin margins. Apple's the one capturing most of the economic value. So that's sort of the upside of creating a new category, and we are creating a new category. The downside is that this is a much, tougher thing to do than just coming saying, yeah, I'm also, I'm doing the same thing, cheaper, faster, a little better than what I'm
Right.
used to. That's a much easier sort of sell because everything is well defined, right? You have you know who the buyer is, what they already have a budget for this, they know how to buy, solution. Like everything is a lot simpler. But yeah, you get a lot less sort of the potential outcome is much, much smaller if you sort of are a Me Too product. So that's sort of the you know, the pros and cons of what we're doing. Oh, I think the mic is.
How are you in particular market?
Oh,
Because I
lost.
are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. How are you in particular educating your customers in your market? Because it's category creation is such a fascinating topic. Because like you said, a lot of companies are in that, similarity where they're able to compare and contrast to different things that they're using. And I think there's a way to, hedge ahead the herd, or there's enough market share, for instance, if it's the recruiting company, there's so many people hiring in any given time that there's enough market share for everyone. But this is kind of blue ocean. So how are you kind of educating your customer base? What are the strategies you use? Are you, getting out doing talks? Are you blogging? Are you, are you kind of going through referral networks? How does somebody create a category?
Yeah, so this, so excited. It's everything that you do just to sort of get the word out there. And this is just I'd say a lot of it's sort of the kind of what you think about is sort of the traditional marketing you'd have to do, but you sort of have to amplify that because things sort of take longer for marketing tends to be sort of both sort of, lead or demand generation, as well as sort of the sort of
Right.
branding exercise and kind of getting the word out there. If you're coming into a space that's very, very defined, I think the focus has to be very much in sort of demand generation, right? Just finding, okay, let's find the people that are buying this now, get in front of them and,
Mhm.
go sell this. When you do category creation, it can't just be there. There's not going to be that many people out there looking for something that just they don't even know exists. Right. So a lot of it is just sort of educating, the market, right? Yeah. Doing, podcasts, right? Doing, speaking engagements, getting in front of people that and sort of educating them that there's a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
To some extent, luckily for us, this topic of confidential computing is becoming very, very important in the sort of battle between the clouds. The clouds are putting a lot of effort behind this because they feel like this is the one thing that's going to enable people to move sort of everything to the public cloud.
Yeah.
So we've seen, Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, did a 2-minute product video about Azure Confidential Computing, which is
Yeah.
a partner of ours. And again, it's phenomenal. When Satya's talking about this, he obviously a lot of people listen. Steve Schmidt, the CISO of Amazon, said in a video interview that confidential computing is the future of data security and privacy. And again, Amazon is another partner of ours. AWS is a partner of ours, and that's great when someone like this says this in an interview. People pay attention, so that's really helping us, get the word out there, obviously, and get people to think about this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's incredible when the categories, kind of going in the direction that you are. So you can kind of work in tandem with that to educate, your customer base market kind of, it's such a tricky situation and it's awesome to hear that you're in a situation where it's kind of working with you, which is fantastic. If everything goes well, what is the long-term vision for Anjuna Security?
Yeah, generally, where I think this is going is so when you kind of think about security, every time there was a security solution that had no performance impact and was super simple to use, it just sort of became the default. And you can think
Yeah.
of sort of firewall is a great example, right? When the first firewalls came out, only sort of these large, banks, these very large organizations kind of use them to protect their networks from the internet. But within 5 years, it's sort of been the same to even connect your home network to the internet without a firewall. And when I kind
Right.
of look at where the the industry is going, 10 years ago, like every website was HTTP, right? Nobody was using HTTPS. And
Yeah.
the large banks started using this. And now, 10 years later, every website on the planet, like it's almost impossible to find a website not using HTTPS. Um, and, um, and the reason is it's just so simple to turn it on, right? And you have, websites like, CNN.com, right? It's using
Hmm.
HTTPS, not because there's anything sensitive on a news website, right? Like it's all, it's all public, but it's just so easy to turn it on and get security and privacy that everybody uses it.
Yeah.
And we've seen the same on encrypting the disk, right? Disk encryption is now the default for everything. And it wasn't like nobody was really using it a few years back.
Yeah.
And this is what we essentially do, is protecting the data and use piece, the data while it's, in memory. So again, this is where I think this is going. Everything is going to be running within a few years in a protected space, and we're essentially the company that enables this to happen. But
Yeah.
where I think this is going, there's sort of two aspects that I think are going to be created by this. One is, once you solve that core problem of security, which is how do you make sure that even if somebody gets access to your infrastructure, they don't have any access, 80% of the security stack becomes obsolete.
Mm.
Like you don't need to kind of stop people from getting on your infrastructure anymore, because it doesn't matter. You don't have to patch everything, all the time, because it doesn't matter. Even if there's a zero day in the operating system, it's not going to affect you. A lot of the monitoring that you do, a lot of the detection, like none of that matters anymore, because again, if somebody's on their infrastructure, it's not going to affect you. So I think 80% of the security stack is going to be obsolete or going to have to change once you have this in. And that's one very, very big shift that's going to happen in security. And the other big shift, it's going to be even bigger than that, is security has always been an enabler for bigger things, right? Without the right level of, like, if you don't have security in your bank, like you're not going to put your money there, right? Without security, like the banking industry wouldn't have existed. If you didn't have security online, Amazon wouldn't have existed. Like nobody would give their credit card online to buy on Amazon, right? So security has always been this enabler for bigger things. And what this essentially enables is sort of a new phase of compute. This essentially enables you to run your code and put your data, anywhere. And I think the first phase of what this will enable is just to move everything to the public cloud, because this solves sort of the core security issue of the public cloud. But longer term, I think where all the code is going is things are moving closer and closer to the edge. And you can think about think about a Tesla, right? A Tesla is sort of at the edge. You have enough compute power there. Is probably as a small data center on the Tesla, but you don't want to run code and store sensitive data there, because what you don't want happening is if somebody breaks into your Tesla, that they're going to have access to your personal information.
Yeah.
So that's why everything is sort of sent to the cloud to be safe. But if you have the ability to run, code and data in a way that even if somebody breaks into your car, they're not going to have access to your data, suddenly you can do a lot more on the edge. And
Yeah.
I think that's the even bigger shift that's going to happen, is it's going to allow you to just run code anywhere. And you asked about the sort of data center, or the sort of, distributed cloud where everything is sort of running, anywhere. This is the level of security that enables that. And
Wow.
if, let's say, some large bank has access computer in the data center, they can go sell it to somebody else and have things run there. If you have data, if that's closer to where the data needs to be, you can go run it in, somebody's
Yeah.
home close to where you need the data. This is just sort of opens up the door to this next phase and the next evolution of compute.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I love the example of being able to, run things on your device and not having to, push them out to somewhere else that's more secure. And I can only see the amount of capabilities that companies and products that will have, and how that will just trickle down to advancements. And so exciting to hear that little soundbite right there, because I really think if we take anything away from this episode, it's the ability to build anywhere and run things anywhere, which is fantastic. I know we're coming up close to time, which is, I hate this part, but I always love to ask this question selfishly, but also for my audience as well. What books or people have influenced you throughout your journey?
Yeah, so I'd say the two that I think are worth mentioning is, or I guess three. One is the book that I mentioned, Play Bigger. I think that's
Hmm.
a phenomenal book about category creation that I think sort of everybody should read.
Yeah.
Another one is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. That was just a phenomenal book to think about,
Yeah.
starting companies. And I know I'm not original saying that. Um, and the last one, I really liked Ben Horowitz's book,
Mhm.
Hard Think About Hard Things. I think this is a phenomenal book. And one, I loved sort of Ben's story about his company and kind of what he went through. I think this is just a super interesting story. But then the second half of the book is just like basically sort of a playbook for, starting and running companies, which I thought was just extremely insightful.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you so much for those. I love those little pieces of research, not only for the ability to have some insights, but I feel like a lot of those you can get some things that are actionable. Whether it's a quote or something inspirational or actually tangible to strategize with and use in your company. So I always love to ask that question. Final question here is there anything I asked you, or is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
Um, no, I think this was a great conversation. Again, thanks for inviting me to be on and kind of sharing my journey and my story and kind of the where I sort of see the future. I think there's this, you talked about quotes. This reminded me that one of my favorite quotes is, the best way to predict the future is to create it.
Yeah,
So I think this is what a lot of entrepreneurs are doing. And yeah, thanks for,
of
inviting me
course.
to be on.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure learning not only about your experience, with successful companies, but how you kind of envision the product development and what your motivation is behind what you're building. I think that's, and also category creation, because I think I have a lot of founders on here that are working within a space that's already built, but category creation is so fascinating because it really, I'm sure you're overwhelmed by the ways you can go in the direction, but it takes a little different level of insight and creativity to be able to have something new adopted to a space. And I really love the point about it being so easy to kind of build into whatever any company's building, like HTTPS and all these different all these different things that firmware or firewall as well. All these things that we, I guess, now take for granted, but are so necessary for us to feel secure and safe or build the way we want to. So, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Last little bit is where can we find you? We're working with support Anjuna Security. Give us your LinkedIn's, your Twitters. Where can we be a part of the mission?
Yeah. So obviously we're on LinkedIn, Twitter, you can search, Anjuna Security. Our website is on Anjuna, say njuna.io. So feel free to, we have a form there. Feel free to email me on ayal@anjuna.io. Yeah, happy to help in any way I can.
Fantastic. Well, y'all, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I can't wait to share this with my audience. But thank you for taking the time to be on Behind Company Lines.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. Thanks for having me.
Of course.